Welcome to another episode of Uncommon Entrepreneurs Lunch and Learns. I'm here today with Ryan Unger. We're at Villa Vista, which is a co-living experiment connected with Homebase. And today we're gonna get into Ryan's background. We're gonna talk about social entrepreneurship and what that means. We're gonna talk about how he successfully exited a couple companies recently in that history, and get into some themes around blockchain. So that's going to be towards the end. You're not going to want to miss that part. Please comment, share, like. This is a community outreach event. This is an experiment in general with us doing interviews. We just got done with filming our 10th with Major Dream this past Friday, and we're gaining momentum. And the intent is it's almost a business card for those in the local Puerto Rican community, for them to be able to, talk about skills that they've learned and talents and in their story, but also give an opportunity for them to let people know what they're up to in the businesses they're working on. And with the idea, which we'll get into more under this social entrepreneurship concept, of a healthy ecosystem that's circular, where we're supporting each other and giving each other the room that we're looking for. So we'll get more into that. So today with Ryan, just to give you some background, in early 2020, Ryan simultaneously exited Punchkick Interactive, his multi-million-dollar digital agency, and Tux, his enterprise SaaS recruiting platform. The former created apps that helped clients exceed $1 billion in revenue and reach the homepage of Apple's top app store multiple times. The latter processed more than 50 million job applications and nearly 1 billion page views annually. Ryan identifies as a social entrepreneur that believes in less for himself, more for others, and enough for all. He's passionate about self-love and achieving daily happiness through gratitude, giving, and growth. When he's not meditating and exercising, he's probably working on his crypto-focused hedge fund and telemedicine startup. How you doing, Ryan?
Great.
Good. Yeah. Appreciate you being here.
Wonderful day.
So comment below with questions, and we'll be getting to them. Like, subscribe. So Ryan, just to get into your background and where you're coming from. You're from Ohio. You moved to Chicago. We're sitting in Puerto Rico.
Yep.
A lot of life has happened. So walk us through Punchkick, what that was, and how that where it came to be.
Yeah. So I started really building software for mobile phones back in early 2000s, 2004, 2005, somewhere in there, and before the iPhone. And what kind of started as a hobby of spending nights and weekends, blogging about this, and just sort of at the time being excited about the challenge of actually putting software onto a mobile phone, because it was a pain in the ass at that time.
Yeah.
It was just an exciting challenge, and so a hobby turned into a passion, and then a passion turned into one day I had to make the choice between, going to work or firing a client, and, going to work and firing a client, or taking on the client and firing myself from the job that I was in. And so I quit that job and went and leaned into Punchkick full time with a business partner, and we kind of bootstrapped it off the ground and started doing work for different agencies and large brands. It was really a crazy time. One of our first things we built was for like Intel and then Qualcomm, and so we just had street cred really quickly, and scaled that agency up and ran it for a bunch of years, and kind of along the way, I think as this will resonate probably with many entrepreneurs, the idea that I've held every role from janitor to CEO, CTO, product, design. My formal background is in design, but I've also been a hacker my whole life, and just kind of married the two together.
Nice. Gotcha. So maybe take us into some dynamics. How was it, managing a team of people and Punchkick? Like how was that as it was scaling? Like, what are some lessons you took away?
Well, there's so many lessons. One thing that was funny for me is, as I think back on it, is the amount of really arrogance I had, I guess, because it was kind of like whatever we were touching was felt like it was turning to gold, and it was and we were in mobile so early that just being in that space at that time, there was just so much opportunity. And as I look back, we really helped a lot of our clients improve, large brand marketers and improve their conversation with their customers. And we built software, and we were building it for other people, and kind of getting paid on a time materials or project basis. And so one of the lessons as I think back is around, I actually pull this from the book Principles from Ray Dalio. My biggest takeaway from that was that if there's ever anything in life where I feel like absolutely certain that I'm right, those are the opportunities now that I shine a flashlight on it and say, okay, what are the shadows in this? Where's my arrogance creeping in? How much of this is my ego? How much of this is can I actually be certain about? And now I certainly talk to more believable people, talk to more experts, talk to one thing I really take to heart is the idea of asking advice of anybody who's affected by a decision I'm going to make. And I think at the time when we were running Punchkick, there were some times where we could have taken what we were doing and built really big businesses, and just thinking about like the space we were playing in and the problems we were solving for our clients at the time. And I think we were so hyper focused on our primary business model that we didn't innovate as much as we could have on other business models. There were some examples of that, like Tux is a great example, where within the agency we basically had saw a need that one of our customers had, and then realized, and it was around this recruiting platform or applicant tracking system that Oracle had purchased called Taleo, and it's just this beefy, enterprisey software that is just had an absolutely hideous user experience. And so we came in and created software that sort of bolted on top of it to just radically improve the user experience for job seekers.
Nice.
And made it a lot easier for them to kind of establish a more of a connection with an employer brand. And so that was something that we scaled and had some success with. And but even as I think about how we scaled with using bank debt instead of selling equity and things of that nature, there were just opportunities that were missed as a result of, one, not knowing better, and two, at the time, being too arrogant to ask for help from, or like, for instance, I remember hearing about Y Combinator and being like, and that we had already gone through a local accelerator, like an accelerator in Chicago through the Entrepreneurship organization, and we're, felt like as if my partner and I, we felt like we were sort of had the answers, so it was like, oh, why would we need another accelerator? Like that kind of thinking was really, hindrance.
Got it.
I think. There's so many lessons too around taking care of another huge one. This will probably resonate with other entrepreneurs as well. I remember starting the business. There was one time where I was programming for 63 hours straight and started hallucinating.
Wow.
And it was awful. And I completely didn't take care of my body, didn't exercise, didn't eat well. And now as I think about being an entrepreneur and the way I prioritize my time and my non-negotiables is completely different. It's flipped in polar opposite, where previously my focus was work until my eyes bleed, eat for sustenance, and never exercise really. And relationships, like what are those? And I remember for years, every Sunday to Monday, I did all-nighters, and it was just my time to play catch up in the business. And now I adjust my time so that I'm primarily focused on, I'd say my number one focus is self-love and self-care, and meditation, moving my body, breath work, journaling, like just really being as mindful as I can be about my time on this planet and making the most of it. And then from there, thinking about, certainly my social relationships and identifying within work, a clear distinction between vanity metrics and like get shit done metrics. And now I'm just much more intentional about how I use my time so that I'm working on things that are actually moving the ball forward, as opposed to patting myself on the back, thinking I'm moving the ball forward when it really might just be for my ego, which I used to do a lot of that.
So let's talk about that transition. I think that's an important theme. Obviously, we're talking entrepreneurship, but when you don't have the right mental, thought process or whatever, you're not as effective. And especially right now with us all being inside and having to make decisions that we haven't had to make with, what you're referring to. So maybe walk us through a little bit how you made that transition of awareness.
Yeah. So the first thing was, I remember the moment that I read, I was at a sort of a entrepreneurial university kind of thing. And that I did for a couple of years with my business partner, and we were talking to, I think I asked Vern Harnish. I remember asking him, hey, I'm into, I don't like hierarchy. Like, it just doesn't, something about it feels icky. What do you recommend I read? And he recommended that I read Emergence, I believe it was. And I read the first 2 or 3 chapters of that book on a plane, and I was just, my mind was blown, because it was talking about ants and how they self-organize and how just incredible ant colonies are. And it was one of the chapters. And then I went into Amazon, what other people read.
Sure.
Got pushed to a book called Reinventing Organizations. And that book changed my life. Reinventing Organizations was the culmination of 3 years of research by the author, Frederick something, Leroux maybe, or can't remember exactly, but it's just case studies of businesses that have thrown out hierarchy, thrown out traditional management, and schools as well, and that have basically created a flat organizational structure that's really evolutionary in terms of how they look at governance. And it was extremely inspiring to me and my business partner. We got copies for everybody in the company. We spent better part of a year on Saturdays and in the evenings, like reading the book slowly as a group, like opt in. Anybody who wants to be a part of it could help change the governance and culture of our company, which we were scaling at the time. And it really got me into this mindset that, one of my absolute core beliefs now is that I don't ever want to do anything that affects other people without getting their advice and without getting the advice of at least one expert. So that's something that for instance, is fundamentally part of me. Another experience as part of this was at Punchkick. We focused a tremendous amount of effort on building an incredible culture, and we knew that because we were an underdog company, we were bootstrapped and all that we had to have 10x better people in order to win, and or to think about winning in the marketplace. And so that was a big push. And then randomly one day at my first Burning Man, I remember deciding, shooting the parakeet as it were, and just deciding that what I was working on, I felt like wasn't having the impact in the world that I wanted to be having. And so I decided to leave those companies and kind of go on a different path, and that sort of eventually led me here.
That's cool. Okay. So yeah, let's get into it. So we're in Puerto
Yeah.
Rico,
Yeah.
right? So what brought you down here? How has it served you?
Yeah, I was well, we were scaling Punchkick in Chicago, and a few years ago, I decided to leave. I had was recently married and kind of moved, and I I remember getting into, this was 2017, so I was just getting into blockchain and better understanding that ecosystem. And one thing I started becoming very passionate about is this idea of trying to do what I could to help close the global wealth divide. And very ambitious, audacious dream.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, I had at the time I remember being in the mindset that I had a lot of success in my life.
Yeah.
And so going back to the arrogance lesson, I thought, oh, anything I touch can turn to gold.
Sure.
And so in my mind, I was like, oh, I've discovered a way to beat the markets,
Yeah.
And so it was, I kind of got on that train, got focused in that, started, spending a lot of time working on trading algorithms and things, and with the idea of being I definitely stole this from somewhere, this idea of less for self, more for others, enough for all. And thinking about
Say that again.
Less for self, more for others, enough for all.
That's good.
And
ponder on that today.
Yeah, right. And it's what I think is so beautiful about that is that profitable businesses can be designed to be less profitable than perhaps they could be, but have greater impact on the world. And that's a nice segue into why Puerto Rico. I remember seeing
and in social entrepreneur concept that we'll be getting into. So yeah, good segue.
Yeah, for sure. And I remember seeing the Blockchain Unbound conference.
I was there too.
Yeah,
that was my first conference.
Yeah, that was my first conference in Puerto Rico. But I remember what really drew me down was seeing a slide on somewhere of Brock Pierce, and behind him were the words, "The new definition of a billionaire is somebody who positively impacts 1 billion people." And that was really interesting to me because this idea, I guess I look at the world from the perspective that I could see. I could see how things in the future go really well. I could also see how things in the future could not go so well, and wanting to be a part of trying to help people live happier lives, and is really the underlying driver. It's when I think about social entrepreneurship, and another big inspiring force was Muhammad Yunus, and what he did with Grameen Bank and micro lending, and he has just stories after story of businesses that he started that were just profitable enough to be sustainable, but through partnerships or having really heart first messaging and missions, he was able to design self-sustaining businesses that do a lot of good, and that just really got me excited, because I recognize I'm at a point now where I believe that if I really analyze purpose and all that, like, why am I alive? There's a big part of me that's like, it's probably to enjoy my life. Like I want to be happy every day, and
it's a choice.
It's a choice, and I know. Although I want to share something on that in a moment, but part of that is, for me, is feeling like if I'm moving the ball forward on helping other people also achieve happiness, I know that that's going to pay dividends to my own psychological well-being, and so the idea, for me today, I just think about, okay, how can I be working on something that can have scalable impact to positively impacting other lives, and that just, those activities are fun, whatever that configuration happens to be in the moment. A quick note on happiness. There's a great TEDx talk from Anil Gupta.
Anil Gupta. Okay.
Yeah. And he talks about how to achieve basically persistent happiness. And he has a simple recipe, which is that at any given time, he scorecards 3 metrics for himself. So think about this for 0 to 10. What number would you give yourself, 0 to 10, for gratitude, for growth, and for giving? And that's gratitude in all its forms, growth, personal development, growth through education, through mental awareness, whatever it is, and giving not just to others, but giving to yourself, self-love, and giving to the planet, and really, and so the simple recipe is score those 3 things, and whatever has the lowest score is what you work on. And I've incorporated that into my life, and it's made a tremendous impact in my own happiness. And I, for instance, when I first started doing this, I realized my gratitude meter was off the fucking charts, and my my growth meter like really high. But at the time, I wasn't giving very much. I was certainly not giving to myself. And of course, if I wasn't, if I'm in a position at the time that I was exposed to this, when I was not loving myself to the degree to which I can and I want to be.
Sure.
I certainly wasn't able to love others, as deeply as I would like as well. But lo and behold, I work on those things, I'm happier. So
yeah, it's a beautiful formula. Wow. Yeah, it's a self-check you could ask yourself on a daily basis. And yeah, I think there's a lot of power in that. So one of the ideas that you had talked about and that we had both sat down and watched, there's a documentary called Tomorrow that you can probably find on like iTunes or something like that. And it was made maybe 8 years ago. It's the idea of essentially social entrepreneurship. So it'll take you kind of on a journey, giving you more like examples and context. A couple interesting takeaways that we found that there was multiple communities around the world that already had their localized, like a local currency in which they were able to trade and kind of keep the money within a community. And, with blockchain technology, which we can kind of interweave in this next segment, that like they were doing this pre-blockchain, and now with the concept of decentralized autonomous organizations or DAOs, there's going to be an opportunity for a localized economy around the world, and might be a little hard to digest on the surface, but we'll break that down. So maybe, what did you take away from that documentary, and kind of your thoughts on, the localized?
Yeah, it's definitely, that question has my head spinning in a couple of different directions. The documentary was great, of course. The lessons in it were really nice. I think the one thing, that I think about when I think about the word tomorrow, and fast forwarding into the future, I personally believe that the future is absolutely limitless, and anything is possible. And the probability of those possibilities is certainly variable, and the probability of someone deciding to be president of the United States, or excuse me, the probability of somebody becoming president of the United States would increase as as time goes on, and they still hold that dream, for example. Or an Olympic athlete, or changing the world, or Nobel Peace Prize, whatever it is, this big aspirational thing. And when I think about, with that in context, the other possibilities are also true in terms of a complete global financial collapse is a possibility. Everything going back to normal, or normal as we knew it, is a possibility, although perhaps low probability. So when I think about the movie Tomorrow, and really a shift towards more sustainable communities and thinking smaller and more local. Those are some of the thoughts that come to mind. It's really interesting too, as I think about DAOs, because in many ways, what we aspired for at Punchkick, and when I think about where I've spent, years in, it's like I started my career as a designer and then hacker, and I was describing I did all these jobs. Eventually, I became a manager, but then eventually, I kind of went through my career continuously trying to fire myself, and all from the perspective of thinking about scalability, and firing myself as a co-founder or as a manager meant empowering our team to be really autonomous. And so when I think about the idea of a decentralized autonomous organization, I really think about that as just a flat management structure and an evolved governance model. And the tokenization of it just happens to make it trustless. And so that it's because in many cases, like in a traditionally, there's always the benevolent dictator. There's someone at the top that ultimately gets to call the shots. It's funny in Reinventing Organizations, in the book, I think it's in the third section, maybe 3.1 or something of the book. The author says for every single company he's researched that had this flat, more evolved organization, I even think, like, if you're familiar with holacracy, a lot of the stuff discussed in Reinventing Organizations is, in my opinion, much more flat than even holacracy. And the one thing he says is absolutely necessary, and the only ingredient that's necessary that he's found between all the organizations he interviewed, was the idea that the CEO and the board of directors must emphatically believe in flat management practices, and they must be willing to give up power. And that means, people setting their own salaries, people writing their own, SOPs, or making purchasing decisions, or, and building structure around that. But thinking about empowering people to where they can ask advice and be able to make decisions. And with decentralized organizations, with small communities, with really anywhere where there's I think of it as more of an evolutionary governance, or introduction of a more evolutionary governance or more flat governance, trying to think about how to create greater equality around power. All of these things kind of start playing together and flowing together in my mind. The idea of local barter economies is also really interesting. It's interesting to me for a couple of reasons. One, as a hedge against a global financial collapse. Granted, who's to say whether computers will be still online? So maybe that's begs the question whether or not micro communities should have their own servers, and just thinking about backups of things. But much like the founder of GitHub recently I saw something that he had put just a tremendous amount of software kind of available in a way where people could clone it and be able to kind of start and continue forward. It reminds me of, in one of the, spoiler alert, in one of the final seasons of Walking Dead, there's this moment where, I can't remember the characters' names, but where they're working on building a little community, and there's this person that shows up, and they have this 3-ring binder full of laminated instructions for engineering schematics for things like plumbing, electricity, I'm sure there might have been a water wheel in there, who knows. But it's I guess it's sort of a random segue, but
yeah, no, that's good.
Where the mind wanders.
Yeah, sounds good. We're kind of wrapping up with the last question or two. Keep the comments flowing and like and subscribe. This is a way we're going to be doing these consistently, so you're not going to want to miss out. And I'm sure you're gaining a lot of knowledge. Share with us, if you want us to fill in the blank on other videos about, behind the scenes on what blockchain and how that works. So in that line of thinking, I think you have an interesting perspective when it comes to like the product side of why blockchain isn't scaled. And if you could maybe fill us in.
Yeah, for sure. I think, I've spent a lot of years working in product and thinking about getting inside of the head of somebody who's using a piece of software or a piece of technology or hardware or whatever it is. And asking some of the most important questions, like what is that person doing 3 minutes immediately before using a piece of software? What are they doing 3 minutes immediately after using a piece of software, around intent and desire and all of that, and frustrations, emotions, and the one just enormous challenge that anything in blockchain has is private key management and just making a simple experience. I think there was a tendency in the last couple of years, especially leading up to the run up in 2017, and even into 2018 and before that, to kind of build things just for the sake of building it. Like, we can build it, we can incorporate this technology, so let's do it. I think that there was less focus on the actual user experience than, in my opinion, there should have been. Like, for instance, not to single out, although I guess any publicity is good publicity, but like there's a token called Argon that was around that tries to basically tokenize governance, and which I think is needed. It's necessary for the future. It's going to be that type of technology is important. But as I was basically hacking with it and tinkering with it and sort of experiencing, and this was granted at this point more than a year ago, but it was, as I was experiencing some of their software, it was just hard to use. Mm-hmm. And as I think about even decentralized exchanges versus centralized exchanges, anybody who's sort of played with those knows that it can be just immensely frustrating to use those user experiences. Like, yep. I mean, I myself, I lost quite literally hundreds of thousands of dollars because I got into I had tokens that, at the end of 2017 leading into 2018, mm-hmm. I probably had a portfolio of, let's say, I don't know, 50 or more different tokens, and on decentralized exchanges. And there was just enough frustration with transferring those tokens and interacting with a decentralized exchange that I was just like, you know what, fuck it, I'm going to leave it. I'm just going to hodl. And lo and behold, you lose 90% of value. And whereas if I could have had a more intuitive user experience around managing that portfolio and be able to like press a single button, move in, move out, or, just thinking about ways where, had that experience been improved, where there had been slightly less frustration, I would have managed that money completely differently. And I think that's an example of the biggest hurdle that blockchain has, is that there's just terrible user experiences everywhere, and there's nothing that's really been so necessary that it's forced it to become ubiquitous. The way that governments around the world releasing a wallet and having a global digital currency would, or the way that if in America every citizen had the opportunity to download an app, verify their identity, and then vote really simply through a simple user experience, or if we needed to download a wallet in order to receive a government, instead of the government wiring to our bank accounts based on what was assigned to the bank account when you filed taxes, if it was, okay, download this app, prove your identity, prove your citizenship, and then that's where we're going to transfer these new digital funds, and so on. So like, until there's a use case that is that wildly improves upon what exists today, 10x better improvement. I just don't think people are going to get over the frustration of how complex and slow blockchain can be.
Interesting. Yep. So on that line of thinking, maybe it's kind of a final question. How do you see things playing out? I mean, nobody predicts anything, but you study, you have your pulse. Where's the, how should those that haven't been paying attention, to blockchain and its inner parts pay attention? What's your thoughts?
So I tend to think about, this makes me think about the movie The Big Short. And there were some investors in that movie who said, and I don't know the true story behind it, but I know in the movie what they had said is they like to invest in circumstances where they're sort of the black sheep, where this really bad thing might happen. Most people don't like to think about bad things. So let's invest a small amount of money into the bad thing, highly leveraged on the chance that, it goes somewhere. That's sort of how I think about crypto and metals, where there might be a global financial collapse. If that happened, there probably would be, in the case of a global financial collapse, cell towers may stay intact. And if they did, and governments didn't have complete chaos, we probably would switch from fiat to a digital currency. If there was complete chaos and servers were not up and cell towers were not up, we would probably switch to a barter economy where metals like gold and silver were important again. It's also possible that neither of those things will happen, or that they won't happen for another 50 years or 100 years or 500 years. They'll of course happen at some point, because every currency in history has been devalued at some point. And so it'd be preposterous to think that the status quo will last forever. But when that will happen, nobody knows. And we may be back to normal-ish in 2 to 4 years, where you can have a cuddle puddle at Burning Man again and not even think about the other person giving you a communicable disease. We're not there yet. And so I sort for myself, I kind of think about how can I spend most of my time loving myself, eating well, exercising, meditating, having the right mind space, having good, people I love and care about around me, working on projects that could have a materially positive impact to the world, to other people, things that make me feel good. And then around that, thinking about, okay, well, what are some investments I could make, or what are some other projects that I can incorporate into my life that would hedge against potential versions of the future that start to look real dark and scary. And that's kind of how I operate. The only other caveat to that was I also learned that, spoiler alert, trading crypto is like gambling. And so one of the things that, just for myself, that I've done is, I've been working on, working with a team of at this point friends but colleagues, partners, that we're doing a lot more, almost exclusively algorithmic trading and pure math, pure statistics, because to me that feels a little less like gambling, and makes me more comfortable because I don't have to think about day trading and all of that stuff. For me, that's just a nasty rabbit hole.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and I know that's kind of the future is algorithmically. So good. Well, I'm glad we had a chance to connect and catch up, and it's always a pleasure. And tune in this Friday. We got another interview. We'll put those notes below, and appreciate it. We'll talk soon.
Thanks.